Liam never imagined a routine drive for supplies would turn into a life-altering ordeal. The relentless drizzle that had been falling for 2 days had finally turned into a torrential downpour, blurring the world outside his windshield into a wash of green and gray. The winding mountain road, a familiar artery connecting his isolated cabin to the nearest town, was slick and treacherous. A flash of brown against the black asphalt, small and pitifully still, seemed harmless at first, just another sad casualty of the unforgiving wilderness he called home. But then it moved. A tiny, almost imperceptible lift of a head. His foot instinctively hit the brake, the old truck groaning as it skidded slightly on the wet pavement. He assumed it was a puppy, abandoned or lost, its mother likely struck by a passing vehicle. When he knelt beside the trembling creature, its fur matted with mud and rain, he felt a surge of protective instinct. What its terrified whimper revealed, however, left him breathless. This was no ordinary stray, shivering in the cold. It was a desperate plea from a world he was not prepared to enter. If you've ever felt that pull to help something small and helpless, you know the feeling that gripped Liam's heart. But what he was about to discover would challenge the very definition of help, and force him to confront a power far greater than himself. He scooped the small body into his arms, wrapping it in the worn flannel jacket he kept on the passenger seat. It was heavier than he expected, dense with muscle beneath its wet fur, and it didn't smell like a dog. It smelled of damp earth, of pine needles, of something wild and primal that tickled the back of his memory. Inside the truck's cab, the creature huddled against the passenger door, emitting a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the frightened yelp of a puppy, but a sound deeper and more resonant, a noise that seemed to belong to the ancient forest itself. Liam turned the heater on full blast, the warm air slowly drying the creature's dark, coarse coat. He studied its features in the dim light. The snout was shorter and broader than a typical pup's, the ears small and rounded. Its paws were enormous, tipped with thick, slightly curved claws that looked surprisingly formidable for such a small animal. He dismissed his unease as ignorance. He'd lived a solitary life for years, surrounded by nature but never truly a part of it. What did he know of dog breeds? It was probably some mix, a rugged mountain mutt built for this harsh environment. The important thing was that it was safe now. It was warm. And it was alive. The drive back to his cabin was slow, each turn in the road a careful negotiation with the storm. The little creature had stopped trembling and was now watching him with eyes that were not brown or blue, but a deep, startling black, like polished river stones. There was an intelligence in that gaze, a quiet solemnity that felt ancient and unnerving. He tried speaking to it in a low, soothing voice. "It's okay, little guy. You're safe with me." The creature just stared, its breathing evening out into a steady rhythm. When they finally pulled into his long, graveled driveway, the rain was hammering on the truck's roof, a deafening drumbeat that seemed to echo the pounding in his own chest. His cabin, usually a sanctuary of quiet solitude, suddenly felt like a very small, very fragile box in the face of the vast, roaring wilderness. He carried the bundle inside, the smell of wet fur and wildness now filling the familiar scent of wood smoke and old books that defined his home. He set the creature down on a thick rug in front of the stone fireplace and quickly built a fire, the flames catching with a hungry whoosh. The little animal crept closer to the warmth, its dark eyes reflecting the dancing light. It looked around the room, not with the frantic curiosity of a lost pet, but with a slow, deliberate assessment, as if mapping foreign territory. Liam found an old ceramic bowl and filled it with water, placing it near the hearth. The creature ignored it. He rummaged through his refrigerator, pulling out some leftover chicken. He tore it into small pieces and offered a morsel on his palm. The animal sniffed his hand cautiously, its wet nose cold against his skin. Then, with a speed that startled him, it snatched the meat and gulped it down. It looked at him, a low rumble starting in its chest, a clear demand for more. He fed it the rest of the chicken, piece by piece, mesmerized by the efficiency of its small, powerful jaws. This was no puppy. The realization was a cold whisper in the back of his mind, a thought he refused to acknowledge. He had saved something. He was responsible for it now. That was all that mattered. As the night wore on, the storm raged outside, the wind howling like a mournful predator. Inside, the only sounds were the crackling fire and the strange, deep breathing of the creature sleeping by the hearth. Liam sat in his worn armchair, watching it, a shotgun resting across his lap, not for the animal at his feet, but for the unsettling feeling that something else was out there in the dark, something that was looking for what he had taken. He told himself it was just the storm playing tricks on his mind. He was wrong. The search had already begun. The first full day with the creature was a study in contradictions. Liam, a man who thrived on routine, found his world thrown into a quiet, baffling chaos. He awoke just before dawn to a scratching sound, not the frantic scrabbling of a dog at the door, but a methodical, powerful tearing. He found the puppy in the kitchen, one of the lower cabinet doors splintered, a bag of oats ripped open and its contents scattered across the floor. The little animal was sitting amidst the mess, happily crunching on the raw grain, its face dusty with flour from a neighboring bag it had also sampled. It looked up at him, not with guilt, but with a placid indifference, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. He had never seen a dog eat raw oats with such gusto. He cleaned up the mess, his mind churning. He tried to rationalize it. The poor thing was starving. It was desperate. But its strength was what truly unsettled him. The wood of the cabinet door wasn't just scratched, it was gouged, the pines splintered as if by a small, sharp tool. He looked at the creature's paws, at the thick, non-retractable claws. They were not the claws of a canine. He decided to name it. Giving it a name would make it familiar, less alien. He settled on Smoky, for its dark, charcoal-colored fur. Smoky, however, showed little interest in the name or in any of the typical behaviors Liam associated with a rescued puppy. It didn't want to play fetch with a rolled-up sock. It didn't respond to calls or whistles. It didn't wag its tail. In fact, it had only a short, stubby tail that seemed more like an afterthought. Instead, it spent hours exploring the cabin with a slow, ponderous gait, sniffing every corner, standing on its hind legs to peer at objects on tables, its balance unnervingly perfect. It would nudge furniture with its head, testing its weight, and once, Liam watched in disbelief as it methodically pushed a heavy wooden footstool across the room for no apparent reason. Its vocalizations remained a mystery. There were no barks, no yips. Only the low, guttural rumbles when it was hungry, and a high-pitched, bleating whine when it seemed distressed or lost. It was that whine that truly pulled at Liam's heart. It sounded so profoundly lonely, a call into a void that couldn't answer. He would sit on the floor, speaking softly to it, and Smoky would sometimes crawl into his lap, not to be petted, but simply to sit, a warm, heavy weight, its strange, earthy scent a constant reminder of the wild world outside. The bond between them grew in silence and observation. Liam learned Smoky's rhythms. The cub, he still forced himself to think of it as a pup, was most active at dawn and dusk. It hated the canned dog food he'd bought on his last supply run, turning its nose up at the stuff. But it devoured berries, nuts, and a sweet porridge of oats and honey that Liam started making for it. Its appetite was voracious, its size seeming to increase daily. Within a week, it was noticeably larger, its movements more confident, its playful nips becoming surprisingly painful. Liam's hands and arms were covered in faint scratches, souvenirs of their clumsy interactions. He knew, with a certainty that was growing into a cold dread, that something was fundamentally wrong. The evidence was irrefutable, yet he continued to deny it. To admit the truth would be to admit a terrifying reality, that he had brought a piece of the untamable wilderness into his home, and that its mother was likely somewhere in the vast, rain-soaked forest, grieving, angry, and searching. That feeling of being watched intensified. Sometimes, when he was chopping wood outside, he would catch a flicker of movement at the edge of the tree line, a shadow that vanished the moment he turned his head. At night, he began hearing noises. Not the usual scuttling of raccoons or the hoot of an owl. This was different. A heavy tread in the undergrowth. The sharp crack of a thick branch snapping under immense weight. He would stand at the window, peering into the oppressive darkness, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Smokey would often be at his feet, whining softly, his nose pointed toward the door, his small body trembling. He was sensing it too. The presence. The hunter. One evening, as a sliver of moon cast a pale, eerie light over the clearing, he saw it. Two eyes, glowing a faint, spectral green, watching him from the deep shadows of the pines. They were high off the ground, too high for a deer or a coyote. They stared at him for a long, silent moment, a gaze filled not with malice, but with a profound, questioning sorrow. Then they were gone. The next morning, he found the tracks. They were huge, pressed deep into the mud near his woodpile, each print a horrifying confirmation of his deepest fears. 5 toes. Long, deep claw marks gouging the earth. These were not the tracks of a wolf. They were the tracks of a bear. A very, very large bear. The sight of the tracks shattered Liam's fragile denial. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The strange food preferences, the incredible strength, the rounded ears, the rumbling growls, the unnerving intelligence in those dark eyes. Smokey was not a puppy. He was a bear cub. And the eyes in the darkness, the heavy footsteps in the night, that was its mother. She hadn't abandoned her baby, she had lost it. And now she had found it. She was circling his cabin, a desperate, powerful guardian held at bay only by the scent of man and the unfamiliar walls of his home. A wave of cold terror washed over Liam, so intense it made him nauseous. He had made a terrible, catastrophic mistake. He had stolen a child from one of the forest's most formidable parents. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get in his truck and drive until the mountains were a distant memory. But then he looked at Smokey, who was clumsily trying to climb onto the armchair, a picture of innocent wildness. He couldn't just abandon him. He had created this situation. He was responsible. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now joined by a fierce, protective resolve. He had to fix this. But he had no idea how. His first thought was to simply open the door and let Smokey out. Let nature take its course. But he couldn't. The mother bear, in her desperation and grief, might be unpredictable, even dangerous to her own cub in the confusion. And what if she wasn't alone? What if other predators had been drawn by the cub's scent? The wilderness was not a gentle place. He had to find a way to return the cub safely, to de-escalate a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his control. The mother's patience would not last forever. Her nightly visits were becoming bolder. The heavy scratching sounds he now heard against the cabin's outer walls were no longer his imagination. She was testing his defenses, her frustration and maternal drive overriding her natural fear of humans. He felt like a man living on a knife's edge, trapped between two worlds. Inside, he had a growing, affectionate bond with the creature he had come to care for deeply. Outside, a force of nature, a grieving mother, was slowly closing in. He was running out of time. The cozy cabin that had once been his sanctuary had become a prison, a fortress under siege. He knew he couldn't handle this alone. His pride, his ingrained solitude, fought against the idea of asking for help, but his fear was stronger. There was only one person in the nearby town he trusted, one person with the knowledge and compassion to understand the bizarre predicament he was in, Dr. Eris, the town's veterinarian. Eris was a woman in her late 60s, with a face weathered by years of mountain sun and a gaze that was both sharp and kind. She had treated his old dog years ago, in the final, painful months of his life, and Liam had never forgotten her quiet competence and empathy. The decision was made. He would have to risk the journey into town. He would have to confine Smokey, somehow get him into the truck, and drive down the mountain, all while knowing the mother bear was watching his every move. The thought was terrifying. Leaving the relative safety of the cabin felt like stepping out of a lifeboat into a stormy sea. He spent the rest of the day preparing. He found an old, sturdy dog crate in his shed, airing it out and lining it with soft blankets. He coaxed Smokey inside with a trail of berries and honey, the cub's curious nature winning out over its suspicion. He latched the door, and the cub immediately began to whine, that high, lonely sound that pierced Liam's heart. "It's for your own good," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I promise." That night, the sounds from outside were louder, more insistent. A heavy thud against the front door made him jump, the shotgun now a permanent fixture in his hands. He didn't sleep. He just sat in his armchair, watching the crate, listening to the mother's anguished search, and waiting for the first light of dawn. The morning broke gray and misty, the forest shrouded in a damp, silent fog. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Liam loaded the crate into the passenger seat of his truck, the cub's distressed cries echoing in the enclosed space. He worked quickly, his senses on high alert, his eyes constantly scanning the dense wall of trees that surrounded his property. He felt the mother's presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. He knew she was there, hidden by the mist, her powerful nose telling her exactly what he was doing. He was taking her child away again. He slid into the driver's seat, his hands trembling as he turned the key. The engine coughed to life with a roar that seemed profane in the morning stillness. He didn't look back. He put the truck in gear and pulled away, driving faster than he should on the slick, winding road. The journey to town was a blur of adrenaline and anxiety. Smokey's cries eventually subsided into a low, mournful hum. Liam reached over and pushed his fingers through the wire mesh of the crate, letting the cub sniff and lick his hand. "We're going to get help," he said, more to himself than to the animal. "Everything's going to be okay." He hoped it was a promise he could keep. Dr. Eris's clinic was a small, unassuming building on the edge of town, a place that smelled of antiseptic and animal fear. The waiting room was empty, save for an old woman with a perpetually grumpy-looking cat in a carrier. When it was his turn, Liam carried the heavy crate into the examination room, his heart pounding. Dr. Eris entered, a warm smile on her face that faltered slightly when she saw the look on his. "Liam, it's been a while. What have you got for me?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "Found him on the road a week ago," Liam said, his voice tight. "A puppy. I think he's sick. He's not acting right." Dr. Eris nodded, her eyes full of practiced sympathy. "Let's have a look then." She unlatched the crate door. Smokey, disoriented by the strange smells and sounds, hesitated for a moment before cautiously stepping out onto the cold, stainless steel examination table. And then, there was silence. The kind of profound, absolute silence that feels louder than any noise. Dr. Eris froze. Her smile vanished, replaced by an expression of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. Her hand, which had been reaching out to soothe the puppy, stopped midair. She took a half-step back, her eyes wide, darting from the creature on the table to Liam's anxious face and back again. The color drained from her cheeks. The old, grumpy cat in the waiting room let out a yell, but neither of them heard it. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of the small room. Finally, she looked at Liam, her voice a barely audible whisper, each word landing like a stone. "Oh my God, Liam!" she breathed, her professional composure completely gone. "What have you done? That's not a puppy." Liam's breath hitched. He knew what she was going to say, but hearing the words spoken aloud by an expert, by a voice of reason, made the reality crash down on him with the force of a physical blow. He felt his legs weaken, and he gripped the edge of the examination table for support. Dr. Eris stared at the cub, which had started to nervously sniff the metallic surface, oblivious to the bombshell it represented. "Liam," she said again, her voice firmer now, laced with a terrifying urgency. "That is a black bear cub. He's maybe 4 or 5 months old." "Where did you find him?" Her questions came in a rapid-fire burst, her mind, trained for diagnosis, now assessing a situation far more dangerous than any animal ailment. "On the old mountain road," Liam stammered, the words feeling thick and clumsy in his mouth. "During the storm, about a week ago. He was alone." "I thought his mother wasn't dead, Liam," she interrupted, her tone sharp, not with anger, but with sheer, unadulterated fear. "She was looking for him. A mother bear will never abandon her cub. Never. If you found him alone, it means they were separated, probably by the storm. She's been looking for him this entire time. She ran a hand through her short gray hair, her mind racing. Have you noticed anything strange around your cabin? Noises? Tracks? Liam nodded numbly, the memories of the past week replaying in his mind, now cast in a horrifying new light. Footsteps, he whispered, scratching on the walls at night. I saw eyes in the woods. And tracks. Big ones? Dr. Eris let out a long, shaky breath and closed her eyes for a moment, as if praying for strength. Okay, she said, opening them again. Her gaze was intense. You are in incredible danger. You have no idea. A mother bear who has been separated from her cub for a week is not just a wild animal anymore. She is a single-minded, grieving, and profoundly desperate force of nature. Her fear of humans will be eroding every single day. The fact that she's been bold enough to approach your cabin, to touch it. Liam, she's not going to give up. She's going to get more desperate. And desperation makes animals of that size and power do things they would never normally do. She walked over to the door and locked it, then pulled the blinds down over the small window. The room was plunged into a dim, clinical twilight. We have to call Fish and Wildlife. Right now. This has escalated beyond a simple rescue. This is a public safety emergency, and you are at the center of it. She picked up the phone on her desk, her hand shaking slightly as she dialed. While she spoke in low, urgent tones to the dispatcher on the other end, Liam watched Smokey. The cub, sensing the tension in the room, had retreated to a corner of the table, making that high, lonely bleating sound. It wasn't a monster. It was just a baby. A lost, confused baby who had been caught between two worlds. And he, in his ignorance and loneliness, had put them all at risk, himself, the cub, and its powerful, heartbroken mother. The weight of his mistake felt immense, a physical pressure crushing his chest. He had wanted to help, to do something good, and instead, he had created a tinderbox, and the fuse was burning very, very short. The conversation on the phone was grim. Liam could only hear Dr. Eris's side of it, a series of clipped, professional phrases that painted a terrifying picture. Yes, a black bear cub. Approximately 5 months. Civilian possession for 1 week. Yes, the mother is confirmed in the area. Aggressive circling behavior reported. Immediate assistance required. She hung up the phone and looked at Liam, her face pale and serious. A ranger is on his way. His name is Marcus. He's the best they have. He says we are not to leave this clinic. We wait here. She sank into the chair behind her desk, the adrenaline seeming to drain out of her, leaving her looking tired and older than she had just minutes before. Liam, you need to understand something, she said, her voice soft but firm. The goal now is not to save the cub for you. It's to save the cub and its mother from us. If that mother bear attacks a human or damages property in her search, she'll be labeled a nuisance bear. They'll have to put her down. And an orphan cub this young. His chances of survival on his own are almost zero. The words hit Liam harder than the initial shock of the reveal. He had thought the danger was only to himself. But his misguided act of kindness could result in the deaths of both animals. The thought was unbearable. What can we do? He asked, his voice raw. We do exactly what Marcus says, she replied. He's handled dozens of these situations. He knows how to read the mother's behavior. The hope is that we can facilitate a reunion. A safe one. She looked over at Smokey, who was now trying to bat at a dangling stethoscope. A flicker of a smile touched her lips. He seems healthy, at least. You fed him well. What did you give him? Oats, berries, some honey. Liam confessed. He wouldn't touch dog food. Dr. Eris nodded. Good instincts. For a kidnapper, anyway. Her small attempt at humor did little to ease the suffocating tension in the room. They sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the only sounds the hum of the small refrigerator and the occasional soft whine from the cub. Liam's mind was a whirlwind of regret and fear. He thought of the mother bear, out there in the woods, driven by an instinct so powerful he could barely comprehend it. He had judged her, assumed she had abandoned her child. But she was the victim in this story. He was the villain, however unintentional. Ranger Marcus arrived less than 30 minutes later. He was a tall, lean man with a calm demeanor that was instantly reassuring. He moved with an economy of motion, his eyes taking in everything at once: Liam, Dr. Eris, and the cub on the table. He gave Smokey a long, appraising look but made no move toward him. "Dr. Eris," he said, his voice a low baritone. Liam, he nodded at him, his gaze direct but not judgmental. "Let's talk through exactly what's been happening." Every detail. Liam recounted the entire story, from the moment he found the cub on the road to the tracks and the eyes in the darkness. Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Liam finished, the ranger was silent for a moment, processing. "Her behavior is escalating exactly as we'd expect," he said finally. "The scratching on the cabin is phase 3. She's moving from investigation to direct attempts at entry. You're lucky you left when you did. Tonight or tomorrow, she likely would have tried to come through a window or a door." The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through Liam's veins. Marcus turned his attention to the cub. "We need to get him back to her. And we need to do it as soon as possible, before she loses her fear of the cabin's sight completely." He outlined the plan. It was simple in its design, but fraught with peril. They would have to go back to Liam's cabin. They would sedate the cub just enough to keep him calm, place him in the crate, and leave the crate in the center of the clearing in front of the cabin. Then, they would retreat to a safe distance and wait. Marcus would be positioned with a tranquilizer rifle, not for the cub, but for the mother, just in case her agitation turned to aggression. "The scent of her cub will be the primary draw," Marcus explained. "But your scent, Liam, is all over him and all over that cabin. She associates that place with the loss of her baby. She'll be extremely wary. She might not approach if she knows we're anywhere nearby. So what do we do?" Liam asked. "We wait," Marcus said simply. "We have to give her time to let her maternal instinct overpower her fear. It's a battle of wills. And we have to hope the right side wins." The preparations were swift and silent. Dr. Eris administered a mild sedative to Smokey, who barely whimpered as the needle went in. Within minutes, his movements became slow and clumsy, and he settled into a deep, drowsy sleep in the crate. Loading him back into Liam's truck felt entirely different this time. It wasn't an act of rescue. It was a surrender, a necessary offering to correct a terrible wrong. They drove in a small convoy, Marcus's green fish and wildlife truck leading the way, Liam following behind, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The drive back up the mountain was a journey into the heart of his fear. The familiar road now seemed menacing, each tree a potential hiding place for the creature they were about to confront. When they arrived at the cabin, the clearing was quiet, almost peaceful in the late afternoon light. But the peace felt thin, like a sheet of ice over deep, dark water. There were new signs of the mother's presence. The woodpile had been partially knocked over. Deep, angry-looking claw marks scored the wood of the front door. She had been there that morning, after he had left. Her frustration was growing. Her desperation was boiling over. Working with quiet efficiency, Marcus and Liam carried the crate to the middle of the yard, about 50 feet from the cabin's front porch. Marcus opened the crate door, ensuring the cub could get out easily once the sedative wore off. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice low. "Now we disappear." He led Liam not back to the trucks, but into the cabin itself. "We'll watch from the loft window. It gives us the best vantage point. She knows our scent is here, so hiding in the woods is pointless. We just need to be invisible." They climbed the ladder to the small sleeping loft, positioning themselves at a dusty window that overlooked the entire clearing. Marcus set up a small spotting scope, his tranquilizer rifle resting beside him. And then, the wait began. The silence was absolute. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun began to dip below the towering pines, casting long, deep shadows across the yard. The sedative would be wearing off soon. The cub stirred in the crate, letting out a soft, sleepy moan. From his vantage point, Liam could see the crate clearly. It looked so small and vulnerable in the vast, empty space. He felt a pang of guilt so sharp it was like a physical pain. He had done this. He had put this tiny creature and its mother through a week of torment. Suddenly, Marcus stiffened. There, he breathed, his eyes pressed to the scope. East edge of the tree line. Liam squinted, his heart hammering against his ribs. At first, he saw nothing but shadows. Then, a shadow detached itself from the others. It was a massive, hulking shape, a fluid silhouette of immense power. The mother bear. She stood perfectly still for a long time, just inside the cover of the trees, a black hole against the deepening green. Her head was raised, her nose twitching, reading the story of the air. She could smell her baby. She could smell the men. She was weighing the risk against the reward. The cub in the crate let out another, louder cry, a clear, plaintive call. The sound acted like a magnet. The great bear took a hesitant step out of the woods, then another. She moved with a slow, rolling gait, her head low to the ground. She was beautiful and terrifying all at once. She stopped 20 feet from the crate, raising her head again to stare directly at the cabin. Liam felt as if her gaze was boring right through the walls, right into his soul. She knew they were in there. A low growl rumbled from her chest, a warning and a question. Hold on, Marcus whispered, his hand resting near his rifle. Don't move. Don't even breathe. The cub, now fully awake, stumbled out of the crate. He saw his mother. He let out a series of high-pitched, desperate bleats and started to toddle toward her. That was all it took. The mother's caution shattered. Her fear was incinerated by the fire of her love. With a soft woof, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, she closed the distance in 3 massive bounds. She nudged her baby with her huge snout, sniffing him from head to tail, checking him for injury. She licked his face, her enormous body shielding him from the world. The cub leaned against her, disappearing into the thick fur of her leg. She turned one last time to look at the cabin, her expression no longer threatening, but simply stating a fact: he is mine. Then, with her baby trotting faithfully at her heels, she melted back into the shadows of the forest, and was gone. The silence that descended on the clearing was different now. It was not a silence of tension, but of peace, of a world set right. Liam felt tears streaming down his face, a release of a week's worth of fear, guilt, and a strange, aching love. He had saved the cub from the road, but Marcus and Dr. Eris had saved him from his own ignorance. And the mother bear, with her unwavering devotion, had saved them all. They stayed in the loft until darkness fell completely, giving the bears plenty of time to move deep into their territory. The drive down the mountain that night was quiet, the 2 men lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the bottom of the road, Liam pulled over. Thank you, he said to Marcus, the words feeling inadequate. You did the right thing in the end, Liam, the ranger replied. You made a mistake, a big one, but you didn't let pride or fear stop you from fixing it. That's what counts. Liam returned to his cabin, but it no longer felt the same. The silence was no longer a comfort, but a stark reminder of the vibrant, chaotic life that had briefly filled it. The empty space by the hearth where Smokey used to sleep felt like a hole in the room. He had only known the cub for a week, but the creature had breached the walls he had built around his heart. He had come to this mountain seeking solitude, to escape a world that had dealt him loss. But in the end, a wild animal had taught him that no creature is meant to be truly alone, and that the most powerful force in any world is the bond between a parent and their child. Months passed. The seasons turned. Winter blanketed the mountain in a deep, silent snow, and spring followed with a riot of new life. Liam's life changed. The experience had shaken him from his stupor. He started volunteering at the local animal shelter Dr. Eris ran, finding a quiet purpose in caring for creatures who needed a gentle hand. He spoke more, smiled more. The emptiness inside him began to fill, not with noise, but with connection. What began as a terrifying mistake on a rain-slicked road became his redemption. He had learned a profound lesson about the line between helping and interfering, between compassion and ownership. His final realization was that the wild doesn't need saving by us, it needs to be protected from us. On warm summer evenings, he would sometimes sit on his porch, looking out at the vast, inscrutable forest. He never saw the bears again, but he knew they were out there. He could feel it. He would see a flash of black in the distant undergrowth, and wonder if it was Smokey, growing strong and learning the ways of the woods from the mother who had never given up on him. A peaceful final image formed in his mind, a massive mother bear and her nearly grown cub, foraging for berries on a sun-dappled ridge, safe and whole. We often think our compassion gives us the right to intervene, but sometimes the greatest act of love is to step back, to let go, and to allow the world to heal itself. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who understands the quiet power of the wild, and subscribe for more journeys into the unexpected connections that shape our lives.